So here we are. The Torah portion is Parashat Ki Tisa, and it's a very, very dense Torah reading, and it has so many different angles that it goes to. It starts off with again continuing discussion about how to get a tabernacle going, and it talks about the half shekel idea that everybody needs to regularly every year contribute to the upkeep of the tabernacle. The tabernacle was produced from the generosity of volunteers, but once the tabernacle is set up, God says, then everybody is responsible for the upkeep of the tabernacle, and that's the half shekel contribution that everybody has to make. Whatever voluntarily you want to give extra, contributions, that's wonderful. But this is a set tax that is applied to everyone. So that's the way the Torah begins. The Torah portion begins and talks about sanctifying, consecrating, anointing the sanctuary, and talks about the incense that would be burned in the sanctuary and the ingredients for the incense as well. And it talks about a kior, a big tub that was used to collect water that was then used for the priests to wash up for purification purposes, not for cleanliness purposes, but for purification. The extension that we have to this very day is washing our hands for before a meal, washing our hands in the morning before we begin our day, to consecrate ourselves to the holy task of living. So that comes out of this week's Torah portion. And then we get this abrupt shift, and the scene changes, and God, is wrapping it all up and giving Moses the Torah to take down the mountain. So we've sort of like gone backwards, a flashback to the fact that we should remember that all of this is God communicating to Moses while he was up on Mount Sinai to get the Torah. And in fact, he receives the Torah, the two tablets. And then God says, but wait a second, the people have messed up. And then we have another scene shift, and we go down the mountain, and we have the scenario of the Israelites panicking out and prevailing upon Aaron to make a golden calf. They worship the golden calf, they dance, and they have all kinds of ritual, celebrations. And then Moses comes down. He's in a great sense of shock, to put it mildly. He smashes the tablets to pieces so that the Israelites don't get the Torah that God had promised them. And then he leads a confrontation with the Israelites, and there's a civil war. And Moses says, if you want to be with God, you have to follow me. And the Levite tribe substantially comes to their kinsman's leadership. We find out that 3,000 Israelites die in the battle. And then we have Moses trying to pick up the pieces, literally. He started already at the very beginning and on Mount Sinai before he went down. And God says, I've had it with the Jewish people. I'm going to destroy them. Moses says, no, you can't destroy them. And God says, I'll start all over again with you. Moses says, no, erase me from your book. If you don't want the Jewish people, then you don't want me. So there's this defiant act by Moses of defending the Jewish people and pledging his allegiance to the Jewish people. But then, of course, when he gets down to the Jewish people, he engages in what we might call acts of tough love, and he calls them to account. And then he has to go back again and ask God, who's had it with the Jewish people, and to reconcile with Israel. God at first says, you know what? Okay, I won't destroy them. Fine, we'll have a relationship, but it'll be by intermediaries. I'll send an angel, and the angel will take care of them, because I'm going to just get too upset with how fickle this people is. And Moses says, no, 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 can't be. We need you and only you. And then we have the very dramatic appeal by Moses, show me your glory. God says the famous lines, you can't see my face and live. We have the 13 attributes of God's mercy. So there's so much there. There's another part, which I already skipped over, where Moses, for a while, is isolated from the people of Israel. He takes his tent and he walks out of the camp, and he just says, you know, I can't live with you. And only if you want to seek out God, then you'll come to me. I'm not coming to you. I'm not going to try to do this for you. That becomes a kind of a tragic substitute for the tent of meeting that God had imagined we would all be so happily committed to. And then we have, at the end of the Torah portion, we have a little bit about the idea that, okay, if we're going to resume our connection with each other, we have the Shabbat to observe, we have festivals to observe, we have certain rules and regulations to observe. I can't go through every single one of them. And the ending of the Torah reading is about Moses and God and the children of Israel, this triangle of communication. And Moses comes down from the mountain with the second tablets, with his face shining. And everybody runs away from him because they're so afraid of this spectral aura that envelops him. And then he has to call them back, and then he has to put a mask on. He has to put a covering over his face to be able to make it possible for he and the Israelites to be able to converse, so that he can teach Torah to the children of Israel. So that's the Torah portion. So it's got a tremendous amount of very deep, important stuff, and we're not going to look at that. So we're going to look at the Haftarah. The Haftarah comes from the first book of Kings, right? The book of Kings is divided up into two books. The first book comes first, so it's the earlier stories of Kings with David and Solomon. The end of David, the beginning of Solomon's rule, and then the aftermath of Solomon's loss of wisdom and his high-handed way of treating the Jewish people. When his son takes over, his son learns from his father's mistakes, learns to adopt his father's mistakes, and is even more high-handed than his father. And that's when the two commonwealths of the Jewish people developed. You know, right, the 10 tribes split, and then we have two different Jewish nations vying with each other, and here we have this is in the north. Elijah is a prophet, maybe the most famous prophet in some ways. His story is told in the book of Kings. There's no separate book of his writings or his pronouncements, but he has an ongoing fight with Achav, who is the king, and Achav is married to Jezebel, who is the quintessential evil queen, and she comes from the Phoenician people, and she promotes the worship of Baal. Baal is one of the deities of the pagan Phoenician tribes, and she is pushing, and she promotes, she supports state subsidies for the worship of Baal. So now we get to our Haftarah, where we get a showdown between Elijah, on representing God, and the priests of Baal. We have, it starts in our Torah, in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, it starts on 548 with 1 Kings chapter 18, but there are two different customs, as there are sometimes with the Haftarot. Ashkenazim have one custom of what to read, and the Sephardim have another custom of what to read. So the Ashkenazim read all the way from the beginning of chapter 18, and it's a lengthy Haftarah. It ends up being 39 verses. The Sephardim only read from verse 20. Is that where they read from?
No.
Yeah, from verse 20. So they skip the first half of the Haftarah. So the what we're going to do is, I'm just going to give, let's do a couple of skippings around in the first half, and then we'll look at the second half, which everybody reads as the Haftarah, and that's the showdown part. The first part is a little bit more of background for what we need to know, how the showdown actually came about. So it's 1 Kings chapter 18, starting with verse 1, page 548 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. And of course, our question always is, what's the connection? Why was this reading chosen for this Torah portion? Somebody want to read for us, please?
I'll read.
Thank you, Sarita.
Much later in the third year, the word of the Lord came
The
to
third year here, so because we have to know that Elijah has announced, not just predicted, but announced that as punishment for the wickedness of Achav and the people, that there would be 3 years of drought. And this is the third year of drought. So this is the third year, not of Achav's reign, not of Elijah's prophecies or anything. This is the third year. The drought has been going on. It's very severe. 3 years is terrible. And this is the tight situation that we're in. We're approximately, if I remember correctly, wait, let me see if he gives me a help in the beginning. Yeah, so we're approximately in the year like 860 BCE, right? So a lot of time has passed since then, right? So over 2,800 years ago. Okay, yeah, so sorry, now, much later.
In the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go, appear before Ahab, then I will send rain upon the earth. Thereupon Elijah set out to appear before Ahab. The famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab had summoned Obadiah, the steward of the palace. Obadiah revered the Lord greatly. When Jezebel was killing off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them 50 to a cave and provided them with food and drink.
Okay, so that's just an intriguing piece of information that we should take note of. And we are seeing that, first of all, we have a brutal, murderous regime. Jezebel, with her husband's support, of course, is killing off anybody who stands up in the name of God, right? So she's massacring anybody who's a prophet of God, means a person who gets up in public and says, no, God is the God and we should all be loyal to God and so on. Anybody that does that, apparently she was not a big free speech advocate, and she kills them. So Obadiah, who is in the inner circle of Achav, so we get this little glimpse here of a little palace intrigue. Obadiah, which means the servant of God, right? The Eved of God. Right? So Obadiah, right? It's the same thing. Is and Obadiah later on is the name of a prophet. This is not the same man, Obadiah. This is a person who has the king's confidence. He's a right-hand man for the king, but secretly he doesn't buy this whole Baal pagan project. So he is risking his life to save prophets of God. And he has this whole underground, literally underground system of sustaining secretly people in hiding, people who, if they went out in public, they would be killed, they would be executed, right? So he's doing this on his own. And now what the king says is, things are really rough. Let's go find we need to scrounge up something. So he sends him on a mission to try to find, is there grazing ground anywhere? Is there water anywhere? Because things are so terrible. Okay, so they went, in different directions, and let's go now to verse 7. Obadiah was on the road.
Obadiah was on the road when Elijah suddenly confronted him. Obadiah recognized him and flung himself on his face, saying, "Is that you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes, it is I," he answered. "Go tell your lord, Elijah is here." But he said, "What wrong have I done that you should hand
right?
your servant?"
Now answers back to Elijah, "Why are you picking on me?"
Yeah. So what wrong have I done that you should hand your servant over to Ahav to be killed? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom to which my Lord has not sent to look for you. And when they said he is not here, he made that kingdom or nation swear that you could not be found. Who's talking? This is Obadiah talking?
Obadiah is complaining. Elijah has been in hiding, just like all these other priests.
Okay, so
all the other prophets, but Elijah has been on his own, and he's been traveling around, and Ahav has been trying to catch him and kill him, and he doesn't succeed, obviously. And he's ruthlessly pursuing him, and he doesn't want anybody collaborating with Elijah. So he's always threatening anybody who helps Elijah with death, right? And Elijah has eluded him all this time. So Obadiah says, "Oh, so this is great. So now you're going to tell, you're putting me now in the position where I'm going to have to come back to my king and say, oh, yes, I met Elijah, and he's standing right at the corner of Park and Bloomfield, and he wants to meet you, right? So thank you. This is a setup for me to get executed. Go ahead. Okay. When I leave you, 12.
Oh, here, 12. When I leave you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you off. I don't know where. And when I come and tell Ahav and he does not find you, he will kill me. Yet your servant has revered the Lord from my youth.
Okay.
My Lord.
So, and then et cetera, et cetera. So he's freaking out, and because he says God miraculously takes you, into safety. God takes care of you, and he humanly is doing his bit with these secondary prophets, but Elijah is getting preserved by none other than God. And he says, I have no control. So by the time I get back to Ahav, God will take you away and put you someplace else. And then Ahav will simply, cut my head off. So thank you very much. This is the thanks I get for being loyal to you and to God. Why are you putting me into this kind of trouble? So Elijah says, don't worry about it. Okay. It'll be okay. I promise that I will be there. Okay. So let's go down to 16.
Obadiah went to find Ahav and informed him. And Ahav went to meet Elijah. When Ahav caught sight of Elijah, Ahav said to him, is that you troubler of Israel? He retorted, it is not I who have brought trouble on Israel, but you and your father's house, by forsaking the commandments of the Lord and going after the Baalim. Okay, so this is Hataza Ocher Yisrael. The word Ocher Yisrael, somebody who is ruining, who is just causing trouble for Israel. So it's so fascinating to see this absolutely disgusting excuse for a human being, Ahav, who's totally convinced that what he's doing is for this is for the good of the people, because anything that's good for him is good for the people by definition. If it's good for me, everybody should be happy. And you're challenging me. How dare you challenge me? So therefore, you are an enemy of the people. Right? This is Ahav's sincere, conviction
and he just throws it out at Elijah. And he says, you are the scourge. You're going to make Israel not great again. Right? So this is you're standing in my way. And then Elijah says, no, I'm sorry. You're the one who's ruining Israel because you're destroying our essence. You're destroying who we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be following God, and you're preventing that. You are the one who is destroying Israel. Okay, so 19.
Now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, together with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table.
Okay, so now this is the challenge. He throws down the gauntlet. And of course, again, the background is important to remember. Achav has not succeeded in ever pinning him down. Achav has never succeeded in ever getting his hands on him. So he's confronted now with this guy, Elijah, and he feels like he has to go along with this, right? He feels like he has no choice. There's something, bigger than just his own plan, but he agrees to have this confrontation. Why would he agree to have this confrontation? This is not a very difficult question to answer. Why would he agree to have such a confrontation? The answer is because he thinks he's going to win.
Yeah.
Right? He thinks that this is a no-brainer. There's going to be whatever it is, 950. How many people are there? 450 prophets and another 850 prophets versus one prophet. He sees no problem here, right? So this is not a person who's simply faking it in terms of his confidence in what he's doing and in who he puts his faith in. He thinks the Asherah and the Baal people, there are strong forces that these gods represent, and he thinks he's gonna be fine, and this is a great way. It's going to be a big propaganda victory. The PR is going to be amazing. The rally is going to be terrific. Okay, 20. Now this is where we get. So that's all background, and now we get to the part that is the Haftarah that everybody reads.
Okay. Ahab sent orders to all the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah approached
Carmel is where Haifa is now.
Yeah. Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you keep hopping between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. And if Baal, follow him." But the people answered him not a word. Then Elijah said,
encouraging, right?
Right.
So at this point, they are, here's the poll, just fill out who do you support? And nobody wants to answer, right? Nobody wants to say out loud to Elijah, at least. If Achab was saying it, then it would be, everybody said, of course we're following Baal, right? So there's this little tension going on here. Elijah has, like I say, he has a certain charismatic standing, a certain power about him, which of course is justified by his success in escaping Achab all these years. And he's got, some kind of magnetism to him. And the people are, they're the big, gigantic undecided, right? They're undecided. Do they want to come out in favor of God, or do they want to come out explicitly in favor of Baal? Undecided. Right? And Elijah says, you are hopping between two threats. You get off the fence, right? Get off the fence. Go to one side of the fence or the other is the kind of imagery we would say today. That's the same kind of image. Okay.
Then Elijah said to the people, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, while the prophets of Baal are 450 men." So I have a question.
Yeah.
So back in verse, the comment in verse 4 was that Obadiah had been saving prophets and had taken 100 of them. And so what happened to all the others? So Ahab found them all?
No, I don't think he found them all. I think that they are, like I said, they're B-list. They're nameless, and they basically, by being prophets of the Lord, meaning are simply people who have had the gumption to declare their faith in God.
Okay.
That's how I would read it. Now, we have no records of anything that they said. It's simply in the face of all of this state oppression on behalf of Baal worship and Asherah worship and all the pagan stuff. There were people who were holdouts and who said, I'm not gonna stand for this. But just by being that, you are a prophet of the Lord, because you're telling, by saying it publicly, you are conveying God's message to the community. So in the end, they don't, there's no record that they didn't survive. Hopefully they survived. Obadiah did a beautiful thing, a courageous thing, a risky thing, but they didn't have any other impact. And clearly what we have here is Elijah saying, you know what, if you want to come after anybody, come after me.
Okay, let 2 young bulls be given to us. Let them choose one bull, cut it up, and lay it on the wood, but let them not apply fire. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and will not apply fire. You will then invoke your God by name, and I will invoke the Lord by name. And let us agree, the God who responds with fire, that one is God. And all the people answered, very good.
Finally, they like that. Right? Finally, they think,
Oh,
okay,
this is exciting.
This is good, right? Yes.
Yeah.
This is the only, and it's only fair, right? It's only fair. Like it's, the possibility that Baal might be God should be given its legitimate chance to prove itself. So, so that's what the people agree. Elijah lets them choose their weapon first, right? They choose the bull first, and he takes the second bull. He takes the leftover bull, and then they're going to do a controlled experiment, right? So this is the beginning of the scientific method, right? Everything is identical, and now we'll see which God will respond. Okay.
Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one bull and prepare it first, for you are the majority. Invoke your God by name, but apply no fire. They took the bull that was given them, they prepared it and invoked Baal by name from morning until noon, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no sound and none who responded. So they performed a hopping dance about the altar that had been set up. When noon came, Elijah mocked them, saying, shout louder. After all, he is a god. But he may be in conversation, he may be detained, or he may be on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and will wake up. So they shouted louder and gashed themselves with knives and spears according to their practice until the blood streamed over them. When noon passed, they kept raving until the hour of presenting the grain offering. Still, there was no sound, and none who responded or heeded.
Okay. So this is, the narrator, really getting into it, enjoying themselves in putting it. And Elijah apparently also really laying into them with sarcasm and with, contempt. But the Baal prophets or priests or whatever you want to call them here are really into it, right? And that's something, again, these are people with a deep conviction, a deep faith in what they're doing. They really believe in what they're doing, and they really believe that if they do what needs to be done, they will be answered by God. So the different activities that they do here are put up for ridicule. For them, it's super serious, and it's exactly what they've always done whenever they've had to do a ritual. So, somebody else's ritual, when you're an outsider, somebody else's ritual can either be very interesting and moving or very stupid, right? And ridiculous looking. If you're an outsider. If you're in it, your ritual is holy and moving and meaningful and hopefully effective. So this is the two perspectives. Between what we read before and here, we have also a little bit of a kind of an echo in verse 26, nice long verse. Verse 26, so they performed a hopping dance around the altar that had been set up. So they had a particular kind of way of dancing, and it was a hopping dance. And this goes back to when Elijah says to the people of Israel, will you stop hopping around? Will you stop hopping? So it's the same word, right? Ad matai atem poschim al shtei hasiivim. The poschim, hopping, is like the Passover, Pesach, right? To jump over something. And here as well, it says vayafaschu al hamizbeach asher asa. So they try everything, including hurting, cutting themselves, gashing themselves, shedding their own blood. This is part of what they think is the proper way to do things. We will have an explicit, I'm not sure, do we have it already once, but we'll have it again in Deuteronomy, that this is prohibited for us. We're not allowed to physically harm ourselves, in an emotional state of mourning or worship. This is expressly forbidden. Here we see this was a well-known, legitimate kind of ceremonial practice. And then he says, come on, maybe your God's busy. Maybe the internet reception is not so good over here. Try something else. Maybe he's sleeping. Wake him up a little bit. Come on. So he's prodding them and making fun of them, and they're just like so serious and so devoted to trying to get this done. And basically, it's almost all day that they try until, as it says here, until the hour of presenting the grain offering in the Hebrew. It is ad la'alot ha-mincha, right? The mincha, so like what we call mincha. So the afternoon, so it's later in the day toward sunset, okay? Ve'ein kol, ve'ein oneh, ve'ein kashev, right? So those three, ve'ein. Ein means, and there was none, right? There was no kol, no sound, or no voice. The word kol can be a sound or a voice, right? Ve'ein oneh, no response, and ve'ein kashev, and no hearing, nobody paying attention. Right? There was no paying attention. So this is the editorial comment. Of course, the fact that objectively speaking, we know that there's no kol, right? Objectively speaking, we know that there was, no sound. They didn't hear anything except their own screaming and yelling and crying and so on. But there was no sound from heaven. There was no sound from Baal. The other two are a little more of an editorial comment, right? The fact that there was no sound, meaning there was no sound of response. There was no sound to show that Baal was listening, that Baal was paying attention, right? Maybe Baal was paying attention and decided not to make a sound. So the answer is no. This is where the test is being made, and Baal would not be able to afford to not respond with a voice, right? This is his creds are on the line here. So if there's no voice, then that shows that nothing has penetrated. There's nobody to talk to, right? Okay, so now we go to the second half.
Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. He repaired the damaged altar of the Lord. Then Elijah took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Around the altar he made a trench large enough for 2 seahs of seed. He laid out the wood, and he cut up the bull and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the burnt offering and the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. "Do it a third time," he said. And they did it a third time. The water ran down the altar, and even the trench was filled with water.
Okay, so let's just get a sense of what's going on. There's a lot of theater here, right? There's a lot of demonstrative action on the part of Elijah, right? We don't have any of that description for the first attempted sacrifice, right? The first bull is taken by the prophets of Baal, put on an altar. There's no problem. They simply are, refraining from lighting the fire, and they're waiting for Baal to send down the fire. It doesn't happen. Now Elijah says, come over here, watch me, right? So you think about it almost like in a carnival, right? And a magician or somebody, now watch, look at that. There's nothing up this sleeve and there's nothing up this sleeve. So Elijah says first, but we find out something about the altar. What do we find out about the altar that Elijah wants to use?
It was broken.
Yeah, the altar wasn't just any altar. It's not like they had, let's set up, some portable altars here. There was an altar dedicated to God at this mountain that had been knocked down. He's not going to use just any altar. He's not going to use the Baal altar. He needs an altar that has been set aside and dedicated by faithful people for the sake of worshiping God. But this altar has actually been, thanks to Jezebel, thanks to everybody else's, feelings and commitments, this altar has been, pulled apart. So then he goes through this whole symbolic act, right? So this is going to take time, and everybody's watching. What are we going to make this altar out of? What does he decide to make the altar out of?
Stones.
Yes, how many?
12 stones.
12 stones. Why? Because that's the 12 tribes. That's the 12 tribes. So remember, at this point, there are 10 tribes and 2 tribes. There aren't 12 tribes because the northern kingdom has split away from the southern kingdom. So he is demonstrating, no, whatever you think you're going to go off in your separate way, you can't go in your separate way. You remain part of the Jewish people. This is a demonstration that is meaningful for everyone. We're all in this together. We are 12, not 10, not 2, not any kind of, separate group. I'm doing this on behalf of a unified concept of the Jewish people. So then, of course, we have the water, right? So the water, he's pouring the water, having the water poured on the animal, on the what do you call it? On the altar. It's flowing into the trench. He's made a kind of a moat that collects all the water. So there's a ton of water here. And of course, the water should make it harder for the sacrifice to catch fire, right? So he's making it even more difficult for his success, right? Okay. 36.
When it was time to present the grain offering, the prophet Elijah came forward and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, for you have turned their hearts backward. Then fire from the Lord descended and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. When they saw this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, the Lord alone is God, the Lord alone is God.
And that's the end of the Haftarah. Okay, so just another couple of comments on some of the way it's written. The mincha is the time, as it says here, of the grain offering. So that, first of all, presupposes a set ritual program that everybody knows about and that everybody, looks toward, which of course is exactly what's at stake here, right? These Baal worshipers, they don't have this idea that, oh, it's time for the mincha offering, right? This is temple lingo from Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been rejected by this whole population. So the reference is, no, that's the real thing that we need to orient ourselves by. But then there's a little bit of a paradox, because the grain offering time is now occupied with a different kind of offering. He doesn't do the grain offering like we do in the temple at that time. He does an animal. He does an olah. He takes a bull and he burns it to ashes. Well, he calls on God, and God sends down the fire, and that's the whole thing. So, and that's his dramatic proof that that it's God who is the master of all of the rules of nature. God can make a fire eat up all the water. God can make a fire come down from heaven. This is what's happening. It's not the usual run of the mill, pun intended, grain offering thing. It's not a run of the mill experience. This is an overriding of everything because the people have been so derelict in their commitments, and it works. It works. Yeah, Alan.
The last sentence, last pasuk, where the people flung themselves, it's reminiscent somewhat of the liturgy on Yom Kippur with the Kohanim.
This is where it comes from. So that the priests falling down on their face and so on is, and everybody else did too. When they heard the priest say God's name, the four-letter name of God pronounced the way the priests knew how to pronounce it, which we don't know anymore, then they would all fall on their face in reverence to God. And falling on the face is in the Torah, numerous times. So that act is an act of homage to God and putting yourself at literally at God's feet, so to speak. But Yom Kippur is alluded to here in a much more direct way. We end Yom Kippur by saying Hashem Hu HaElokim, these words 7 times. That's the end. That is the end of Ne'ilah. That's the last things that we say. The last thing that we say for Yom Kippur is these words, right? That occur here. In the standard versions of Ma'ariv, this is part of the last bracha after Hashkivenu, where we tell this little story. We don't go through the whole details, but we say, Hashem Hu Elokim, Hashem Hu Elokim. That's part of the last bracha that is recited in Ma'ariv before the Amidah. So we recall this traditionally every night, according to some practices, and definitely on the most moving, significant evening when we finally say, you know what, we are clean, we are completely atoned for. These are the words that we come back to. So this is definitely a super important moment in our history. All right, so now in the time that we have left, what is this Haftarah doing here for this Torah portion?
This is the bowl.
Oh, that's it. They couldn't find any other readings, prophetic readings that had a bull mentioned in it, so they were stuck with this one. All right, that's one theory.
But the whole egel, the whole going away from God, and then the prophet coming down and bringing us back to
Right. So this harkens to that central, what can I say, shock that that's administered to the people of Israel by themselves at the very beginning of their history, right? Where we had to have this challenge where Moses says, whose side are you on? And Moses says, he comes down and he says, are you with God or are you with the calf? Right? Who's with me? Right? And here we have it in a very dramatic and much more delineated way about the stuff that he does. So yeah, in a central, essential way, that's the thing. We have to choose. So yeah, Jen.
I don't know if this is where we want to go, but this seems like, okay, when this is happening in the Torah portion, we have the tent of meeting, but we don't have like a temple in Jerusalem yet. And what's happening here with Elijah is also outside of the temple in Jerusalem. He's actually making sacrifices where you wouldn't normally think that we would be making sacrifices.
Right. So let's unpack a little bit of what you're saying. There's a similarity, and then there's a whole bunch of other things. Obviously, it can't be exactly the same because history has unfolded, right? We're at a much different stage in our development. We're a real people. We're with established shrines, whether it's Jerusalem or the established shrines that they had in the Northern Kingdom, like in Shechem. So things have changed. But let's just add as a common element, when we didn't have a shrine yet, before we established the tabernacle, in the, in our Torah reading era, what did we have?
We have
Where does the dancing for the golden calf, where does it take place?
at the foot of Mount Sinai.
Yeah. So we have here again, mountain. We have a little bit of a comparison as well, but a very contrasted comparison, right? Mount Sinai is the mountain where God actually came down and boomed out the 10 Commandments, and everybody was, shaken to their whatever the phrase is, and here we have a different mountain. We have Mount Carmel. Haifa's not there yet, so it's not such a big deal. But it's so, and it's not a mountain that has been sanctified by God's presence or anything like that. In fact, the opposite, right?
There's another different.
The altar to God. There was an altar to God on this mountain because people like mountains. Mountains, have a lot of power to them. So, and yet it was destroyed. It was smashed, like
the
golden calf.
yeah,
the other
10
tablet
Commandments
before
and the
that.
calf.
But the tablets, yeah.
the tablets were also
Yeah.
smashed, right? So we've got a whole smashing theme. Yes, Sarita.
So in the Torah portion, at the time that's happening, I mean, the people have witnessed so much that to know about God's presence, and yet they still, right, stray. Here, Elijah is saying to God, show them, right? They don't know. They haven't seen. Let them see something that lets them know that you're there, right? So that's also a very big difference.
Right. So yeah, the knowing is really essential here. It's said again and again. And actually that knowing is mentioned in our Torah reading also. And of course, it's mentioned all over the Torah, right? This is what we're supposed to do. What do we say in the Aleinu, right? V'hashevota el vavecha.
Yeah.
Ki Hashem hu Elokim. This phrase, Hashem hu Elokim, right? Put it into your heart so that, and v'yadata hayom, know this day, right? And at the end we say, v'nemar, everybody, let it be so that everybody will know this, right? Yakiru v'yedu kol yoshvei tevel. Let all the people who dwell in the world and know this. So knowing that God is God is, it's out there as something super essential to achieve. And then what we're seeing again and again is how hard it is to hold on to that, right? In the Torah reading, we often, when we read the Torah reading, so it's very shocking. How could they turn their backs on God after 40 days? But we also give an excuse, right? We also want to, say, hey, come on, what do you expect from people like that? After all, what are the kinds of things that we say to extenuate the circumstances of the people dancing around the golden calf? What do we say?
Well, they were slaves, they don't know how to be free, and right.
So their experience, their history hadn't yet developed sufficient roots for their faith in God. So it was still very superficial. It was still very new. It was still, very, very fragile. So that's some of the ways that we sort of like try not to be too judgmental about the people. And in the end, that's what happens. The only a small 3,000 people that die in the Civil War is nothing compared to the phenomenon of how many people were dancing around the golden calf to begin with. There's like this very fickle shift. We jump, into a mass phenomenon, and then something shifts in the wind, and then we jump out of that mass phenomenon, and we get out. But we're going back and forth, and that's another part of this, right? That's what Elijah says in so many words. Where's your stability? But now I want to go the other way. That yes, the Israelites in the wilderness saw this manifestation of God and so on, but it was very new. So how do we expect them to really incorporate it? By the time we're going over here, guess what? It's been hundreds of years. So when does a tradition get to become credible enough and assimilated enough into a people's consciousness so that you can assume that they will live with it, right? And what we see is that it really hasn't quite happened for everybody, even though they know all the stories and they know all of the miracles that took place, and the miracles that happened with the judges, and the miracles that happened with Elijah. I mean, there have been these miracles, not like splitting the Red Sea, but plenty of miracles have happened in the biblical stories since getting into the land. It doesn't take, right? It doesn't take root in this kind of like mass permanent way. It's a struggle every time. And this, effort by Elijah is an extreme and desperate effort. Jen sort of hit it on the head before. This sacrificial stuff, what I said, this is a different kind of sacrifice than what's supposed to be happening in the temple. By now, it's prohibited to have any sacrifices outside the temple. You're not allowed to have sacrifices outside the temple. One of the terrible things that the Northern Kingdom is guilty of is rejecting the temple and setting up sacrifices elsewhere. So this is the whole Deuteronomic program. We're all supposed to be loyal to the temple in Jerusalem. So part of the irony and paradox here is that in order to save the Jewish people and save the temple and save the Torah, Elijah actually violates a basic rule, right? And that's a smashing of the tablets too, right? It's so famous that Moses smashed the tablets that the shocking quality of it is sometimes, doesn't get really, given full attention. What gives this man the right to smash tablets created by God? And he does it because he knows that that's the only way he's going to snap the Jewish people out of this. And Elijah similarly goes through this whole very, very, very dramatic and a certain kind of like, magical theater. God's not supposed to be operating this way, but he sort of forces God's hand because otherwise the game is going to be lost. Right? So for the sake of that, he breaks the rules as well, just like Moses did. All right, we're going to stop here. There's so much more to take in, and everybody's invited to listen to the Haftarah on Shabbos. Okay, with the Torah reading. Okay, so take care, everybody.
Very exciting.
Bye.